Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And today we're going to talk about generosity. It's the season for generosity. People are giving and receiving a lot of gifts. And we have this concept of generosity of spirit, which is that people are in a good mood. They're smiling, they're happy, they're sharing their positive mood with other people, and so they're being generous with their spirit. But we want to talk about generosity in maybe some unusual ways.
Non-traditional generosity ways.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I was thinking about this myself and sort of interested in this concept of generosity is that there are elements where otherwise extremely generous people are extraordinarily stingy in a way where they would never see themselves as being ungenerous due to this component. And that component is being psychologically generous. We think of generosity in terms of material things, giving money, giving gifts, giving physical material possessions.
Or time.
We think about generosity of time, right? Time is really important to us.
Affection.
Generosity of affection, emotional generosity, right? Like being happy and sharing our happy mood with other people. But I think the one area in which we have complete and total social carte blanche to be stingy is in our psychological generosity. Like we don't have to be psychologically generous in order for people to define us as a generous person. So we're allowed to be super stingy in this area of life. And when I mean psychological, or when I say psychological generosity or psychological stinginess, I actually mean when we're sharing opinions, or like one example would be when we're sharing opinions with other people, or sharing a perspective, or sharing a position, maybe a paradigm with another person. And maybe we get halfway through explaining it, or maybe we've explained it completely, or we feel like we've just shared a component of how we think. And the other person starts to rip it apart. They start to, basically dogpile your thoughts, or dogpile the work you've done in this way of seeing reality. And that's totally acceptable. It's totally acceptable to say, you're kind of being, you're kind of being an idiot here. I mean, I don't think people think it's okay to call other people an idiot, but I think that, ripping apart each other's thought processes before we fully understand them, I think we're totally okay with that in this society.
Yeah, one of the things this comes up for us in Personality Hacker, we're putting ourselves out there a lot online right now. We're shooting a lot of videos. We've got a lot of content we've written, a lot of podcasts we've published. We're all over the social media channels. And it's interesting to me to see someone come on and maybe watch a quick 5-minute video that you and I have put together and put out to the web. And they'll make a comment, kind of maybe a negative comment, or a comment that disregards what we're saying. And it's not an attempt to understand what we've communicated or what we're trying to communicate. It's almost like, well, I know better, or I disagree, so you're irrelevant all across the board in certain ways. And we haven't gotten too much negative feedback. I mean, we've overwhelmingly got positive feedback. There's a few of these little pop-ups where somebody's come on and they've made a comment like, oh, I see, blah, 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 about whatever, in a negative way. And it's like, did you not hear what we were saying? We weren't trying to be, I guess it's this idea that if you listen to the whole context of what somebody's trying to say, or why would we go on and make videos if we had bad intent? So why would you assume bad intent? These kind of things come up. And again, it doesn't happen very much for us right now. I'm sure as we scale up and get more and more published online, this will happen more and more. But it just popped up. I think this is what started the conversation originally about this.
Yeah, I think that was the launching pad for our conversation. And then I started noticing it all over the place in areas that had nothing to do with us.
Exactly.
It started the conversation we did this series of video blogs about the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types. And I used the word granular in every single one, right? And it was because when we recorded them all at the same time. It was boom, boom, boom. We had to record 16. The pressure was on to get them down to 5 to 10 minutes. And I started using the same words because it was just easy to do that.
Sure.
And so I used the same words repetitiously. And we've had maybe 2 negative comments for the entire 16 videos, which considering YouTube's quality of comments, that's pretty good. I think we're just about batting 1,000 there.
No, I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned that I use the word granular over and over. And
you've used it twice in this conversation already.
I have. And so it was really interesting because it was like all of the content got disregarded because of one word that was used repeatedly. And then I started noticing, I remembered a Facebook conversation where I posted a quote by Buckminster Fuller on how basically we force people into menial labor jobs in order to make a living, and we're wasting all of this talent where we could be turning people's minds onto more creative projects. Right? We could really be harnessing this incredible, psychological power and focusing it towards solving big problems, but instead all these people get roped into a day-to-day living. And what was crazy to me was that a major argument started under this, under the picture I posted, under this quote from Buckminster Fuller about how he didn't know anything about how society works, and how does he get off saying that he was able to think tank as much as he wanted to, but he doesn't really understand how economy works. And if we did that, we'd have no janitors, kind of the sort of the basic conversation that ends up, getting sparked. And another person came in and said, I don't think you're trying to understand what he was saying. And the person who was really arguing against it would not listen to the premise.
To the meaning behind it.
Well, they wouldn't listen to the other person's premise that they were simply not trying to understand what he was saying. They were taking exactly what he said at face value, or at least what they perceived as face value, and they were tearing it apart, saying he didn't understand what he was saying. Now, far be it for me to ever say that Buckminster Fuller had not thoughtfully created if he was going to quote something, my guess is he had put some time and effort into thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's Buckminster Fuller. That said, it was really interesting how the person who was defending the quote kept indicating that this other person was simply not being generous of spirit. That's what they kept saying. You're not being generous. You're not trying to meet what he said where it was said. Like, what was the context of what he said? Where was he at in his life? What had he been thinking? And they were just ripping the quote apart. And so what you're talking about, which is, when you get some negative feedback from the world and you notice that the negative feedback comes from a place of not trying to understand where you were coming from. And then I start to see it everywhere. Like, somebody makes a comment and the person takes the comment at face value. And then because it doesn't resonate or gel with how they have chosen to see the world, now they're going to rip it apart. As opposed to, instead of jumping into judgment, maybe taking a step back, maybe trying to see a bigger picture, maybe try to figure out why that person would say that in that way. Where are they coming from? How is this comment an emergent of the entire system of the human, of the person who said it? How was their past, or how was the comment colored by their past? How is the comment the natural result of their experiences?
Yeah.
The position in life that they come from, the socioeconomic position. How can we be generous in recognizing that what a person says maybe can't just be taken at face value and picked apart, but rather needs a little bit more generosity from us to come to that person's sandbox and really try to understand what that person was saying?
The other thing that I see happening too is the sensationalization of what people say. So it's not so much picking it apart, but it's amplifying it in a direction that they never intended. So this happens all the time with politicians. The media will get a hold of a soundbite that some politician said after being tired on the road for like 6 months, right? They've been like campaigning, they're exhausted, they've been up all night, they're giving speech after speech, and they say one thing, they make a slip with the tongue, they maybe transpose a couple words, and now it's this soundbite the news media takes and says, do you realize that so-and-so politician or this president or this senator said such and such, and how horrible of a person? And then like there's a day or two of people talking about this now, this one little soundbite, and unpacking what the meaning behind this is and their true intent behind it. It's like, come on, guys. You can't boil down a person's position by one sentence. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on or what side of the socioeconomic spectrum you're on. It's just, that's not a reality. It's not what they're summed up by.
It's a war on fill in the blank.
Whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Like, so we see the news, and this might be why culturally we do this, is because we're fed this newspapers, media, television, radio, blog articles. It's sensationalism on sound bites rather than trying to get to the context or the meaning behind what people are saying. So there's no generosity there. It's a way to get clicks or views or to make money instead of true understanding and true problem solving.
I think it comes from a position that things have to be naturally oppositional. Like, it's a dualistic perspective. It's this concept that there's always a line in the sand, and where do you fall on either side? Mm-hmm. It's this, I think that's a premise of how people see reality in general. That's like a frame of, it's dualistic.
There's two sides, which one are you on?
Two sides, which one are you on? And I think we do that because it makes life so easy for us. Like, the idea of, I don't get to just jump to a judgment. I don't get to just react, create some sort of reaction against what you just said that for some reason didn't resonate with me on some level. And so, because it didn't resonate, this idea of stepping back and asking myself why it didn't resonate and trying to figure out where you authentically came from and trying to make some sort of, reconciliation between these two things, that represents work. And I think our minds are very similar to our bodies in that if we haven't exercised these muscles, if you have not exercised the muscle of holding space, and by holding space, I mean you hold space for another person to be able to say, do whatever it is that they're going to say and do without having to jump in and react to them. You just hold some space, right? You just create a container where they get to express themselves, and you don't feel like you have to go in and, create some sort of mastery over it. You don't have to show them that they're right. You don't have to validate them, or you don't have to discredit them. You can just let them be. Mm-hmm. If you haven't built the muscle of holding space, it is a difficult thing to do. It's like any other muscle. And so, because like you said, we don't live in a society that encourages us to do that, where would we learn to? Unless we have a natural talent for it, who's going to teach us to hold space for other people? So since we don't pick it up in our society, and since we don't really have people who teach us how to do this, then we don't have the muscle built. And so in order to have generosity, psychological generosity, it means that we're going to have to work 10 times as hard just to get up to a point where we're able to even acknowledge that we're doing it. It's like going to the gym for the first time. That first time, that's a rough time.
Yeah.
That first time of going to the gym, you're awkward, you're uncomfortable, you're not sure if everybody's looking at you, all of the weights feel really heavy, and then 2 days later you can't move because it feels like the first time you've ever used your legs. So it's not easy to do. And yet, it's the healthiest thing you can do in order to remove this concept of there's always a line in the sand. You've always got to create, a good and bad guy. It's always got to be win-lose. If you want to get to a level of win-win, if you want to get to a level of, we actually are working together, we're cooperative, we're trying to figure out how to navigate this world together as opposed to over hyper focus on our little war that we've created, which of course by definition creates a very myopic frame, right? Because you're so hyper focused on this little, kerfuffle that you can't actually zoom out and see a bigger picture and go, oh, look, we're arguing about whether or not there's a war on Christmas. And over there are 5,000 children who died today of malnutrition, right? Who cares about a war on Christmas? Who cares? Over there, children are actually losing their lives. But it makes it easy, right? Because then we don't have to think, how do we solve the problem of children losing their lives from malnutrition? We don't have to think in terms of, how do I hold space for this other person and allow them to have their perspective on Christmas or happy holidays or whatever. I can just hold space for them. I can just allow them to do whatever it is that they're going to be doing. I can try to see them, their position from their perspective and understand how it's a natural emergent of who they are. And then now everything is calm. There's a peace. We can cooperate. We can figure out some sort of, coming in the middle and figuring out how we can coexist. Yeah. And now that the kerfuffle's gone, look, there's kids over there dying of malnutrition. Maybe somebody should help do something about that.
Yeah. There's a great example of this. We were watching the new what is it? Performance, I guess.
Stand-up.
The new special by Bill Burr, who's a comedian. And just a caveat, if you're a comedian, a fan of comedy, Bill Burr's a little rough with language and some of the concepts he talks about. So that's just kind of a warning. It's on Netflix if you're a subscriber.
If you are easily offended in any way, shape, or form, don't watch it. But if you're not, he's brilliant.
He really is. And he has this one bit in his new special that just came out this year talking about basically this concept, of generosity of spirit and how to see things from other people's perspective. And obviously it's framed in the sense of comedy. And he brings up the issue in the past few months, the elderly gentleman that's part of the group on the television show Duck Dynasty. So that's a United States reality show on I think the A&E network. I've actually never seen an episode of this. I've only seen clips online, but I know that there's an older gentleman there, and I think he was asked his opinion about, I think it was homosexual marriage or gay marriage or something of this nature, right? This guy's, I think, in his 60s or 70s. He's an older gentleman, and Bill Burr was saying he was commenting on the media and how everyone got worked up into a frenzy about this gentleman's opinion, which was very anti-gay marriage. It had some anti-gay marriage stance, some anti-homosexual stances, or something of this nature.
I don't even think it was marriage. Maybe it was. I'm so out of the loop on it that I don't know. But I know that it was like described as anti-gay.
It caused a firestorm of media speculative, like how dare he? How could he say this? Who does he think he is? And this comedian Bill Burr says, "What did you expect this guy to say?" Like, honestly, take a moment and perspective in this guy who was born and raised in the southern part of the United States. He was raised 30, 50, 60 years ago is when he was being, brought up. There was a totally different culture, totally different worldview.
Right.
And the part of the country that he's lived in all his life, and he even has the bit about him, he's in a swamp shooting muskrats and like varmints. And this has been his experience. Why did you assume he was going to be this enlightened, cosmopolitan, metropolitan, like forward-thinking person?
Yeah.
What is wrong with people that they didn't realize this is exactly the kind of thing this guy would say?
Yeah, because when he was programmed, like you said, he's in his 60s, maybe 70s. So when he was getting his first programming about how reality works, that was the accepted way of seeing reality. The accepted way of seeing reality was to be very, it
wasn't even talked about because it was so assumed it was so wrong at that time period.
And there was no such thing as gay marriage then.
Yeah. Like, that would have been ludicrous for people at that time to think about.
So now the last programming he got on the subject was that. And he's been in a swamp for the last 50 or 60 years. And so somebody brings this subject up again, right, to him for the first time possibly in 50 or 60 years. And what else is he going to do but parrot what he had heard before?
Yeah. And so obviously we look at that and say, well, that he doesn't have very much generosity of spirit because he doesn't have a stance that's supportive of homosexual marriage, of gay marriage. He doesn't have a stance that's supportive of that culture, that movement, that progressive thinking. So we think, he doesn't have generosity. But as we look at him, where's our generosity of spirit of understanding the emergent he's coming from? And as we talk about emergence, you talk about things being brought into like a black and white, you're either on side A or side B, opposing forces. And we did a great podcast on systems thinking and talking about emergent properties of systems. If you haven't listened to that, it's a great podcast to go back and listen to because we unpack some of these ideas that there's really no such thing as cause and effect. It's really emergence of systems. And so that, as we talk, that model, just kind of keep that in mind as we talk because that's something you can pull from in this current conversation. But why do people not give the guy from Duck Dynasty, for example? What is it about us that doesn't have the world's moving on and this guy hasn't caught up. And why do we dogpile him and just, beat him to a bloody pulp? Not that we should agree with his stance. It doesn't mean we should accept his stance. But why are we so ungenerous to say, how dare he? He's an idiot. Like, the guy's just going through his life doing what he knows to do. And where is the generosity from us toward these kind of people?
Right. Well, and I also think, I think what, in that particular scenario, I think what people fear is that if you have, we work socially in trajectories. We were talking about this the other day, how one of the reasons why we get so worried when we get a lot of negative feedback is that when people see negative feedback, if they're a third party and somebody's talking crap about somebody else, we'll be swayed by that. So a person will come to the table neutral, and then they hear all this negative feedback, and suddenly they're feeling negative because these other people were.
Sure.
So we're so easily socially influenced. And so I think what we fear is this idea that if a lot of people are representing a certain position that we don't agree with, then that's the way society's going to go, right? Like, we're on that trajectory. But when you look at these relatively new social issues, the trajectory is changing. It really is. I mean, how do we feel about gay marriage now versus how we felt about gay marriage 50 years ago? Well, like you said, it wasn't even, like, those two words would never have been put together in the same sentence.
Yeah, it was not even been a topic of conversation. Right. It was so out of frame for people.
Well, how do we feel about marijuana? I mean, you and I just recently watched the Riff Tracks episode of Reefer Madness over the last couple weeks.
It was made in the 1930s.
Yeah, Riff Tracks is done by the guys who used to do Mystery Science Theater 3000, which were basically three people who are making fun in real time of a movie.
Yeah.
Perfectly my sense of humor. So I've always loved Mystery Science Theater 3000. And now they do something called Riff Tracks. And they did a live version of Reefer Madness, and it was hilarious. But Reefer Madness on its own is hilarious. Like, the sensationalist, ridiculous propaganda against marijuana is... I mean, it's so silly. It's like, it's insinuating that people, like, axe murdered their entire family because they were on weed.
Incurable insanity. Like, whether or not it doesn't matter what side you come down on the marijuana issue, it is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous,
It's not helping get to a sober-minded decision about it. It's just nuts. It was made in, like, 1937, I think.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a propaganda film designed to scare people around this herbal substance, basically.
Right. Well, and now, like... I mean, my speculation is that it's going to be fully legal in the next 5 years everywhere. I mean, I could be wrong, but that feels like the trajectory we're going on.
At least as a medicine.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got all of these social issues that before there was no opening for conversation. And now the trajectory is that not only is there an opening for the conversation, but we're headed towards a completely new way of seeing all of these issues. So it's not like we're fighting trajectory right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's trajectory of social issues is the Titanic. It takes a while to turn, right? But we're on our way to turning a lot of these issues. So when we see somebody who's coming from an old paradigm, from a time period where they were being programmed when the issue was never even talked about, and so they're spewing that same position, well, of course they are, because that was where they got their earliest education. So... that's an extreme example, I think. I think one of the more reasonable examples that Bill Burr gives is when he's talking about his parents. He says that he never really got hugged when he was a kid, so he asked his mom why. And she said that she was afraid that it would turn, because she raised all boys, she was afraid that it would turn them gay. And so Bill Burr, like, pursued that a little bit further, and she said, well, it was really their dad who thought it would turn his boys gay. And Bill Burr mentions how that could sound really, really, really awful. But he goes back one generation and he looks at how his father was raised, and basically he describes a scenario in which his father was hugely physically abused. Like, his father was beating him. So he looks at, like, just 2 generations ago, right?
Yeah.
And goes, well, my dad was raised by having the shit beat out of him, and he raised me not by beating me, but by simply withholding some hugging. That's a massive improvement.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Like, that's a huge improvement.
Has it gone all the way in a good, completed the cycle? No. But man, is that a great step forward, right?
Absolutely. So a lot of times, a position a person takes right now might not be where we want them to be. But if you look at the etymology of the position, have they made improvements, right? Like, was one generation before programming them to think something truly heinous, and they did enough thoughtfulness during their lifetime to morph that into something a little less heinous, right? And it's not still where we want them to be, but it's much further along than what they were programmed to think. So when we get this concept of psychological generosity, it's not just a matter of, like, holding space for somebody's ideas, but really meeting them where they're at and looking for improvement, looking for ways in which their position isn't just distasteful to us, but is actually showing that they, as an individual, are on a trajectory of development and growth and seeing things a little better than maybe their previous generation, and that they're teaching their kids, in a way that their kids will now be even better than they were, right?
Yeah.
Are we on I guess it's really about trajectory. Which trajectory are we on? Are we on a trajectory of growth, or are we on a trajectory of, like, getting further and further in the mire? And I think generosity, like psychological and mimetic generosity, takes that into account, right? It doesn't just tear down what the person was saying. It holds space for it. It tries to figure out why the person said this as a natural emergent, and then it looks for growth within what the person said or the position they're taking.
Yeah. And there's a great phrase that one of our mentors uses, and the phrase is progress, not perfection. Are you seeing progress happening through this? So, and this could be, this could be something, we're talking about generational progress. We're talking about like long timelines. But this could be something where, we know a couple right now that have gone through kind of a messy separation. It was a real bad ending to their marriage. They've got 2 kids, and the generosity of spirit was not there up until maybe a few weeks ago. And now they're coming to the table where they're both making some efforts to try to co-parent together. And they're starting to see generosity from the other person. Instead of assuming the worst, they're now assuming, okay, I think this person might have good intent for my children and our children that we co-parent with. Even though they're still kind of personally, their situation's messy, they're probably headed toward divorce. But they're looking for ways to be generous with each other to co-parent. And I think that's really, you can see progress there on a micro level as well as a macro level. So we're talking about that macro generational progress, but also on a micro level within a few months or a few weeks. Can you find ways that you can be generous towards somebody where they're making an attempt to improve and get better? And I think one of the things is when you are finding where people are improving and you reward them verbally, or you acknowledge it, or you even just in spirit, you have an internal gratitude toward that, I believe that seeds more of the same. I think like begets like. So as we have more generosity of spirit, it's going to have other people have generosity of spirit toward us. And we're going to see a progression forward rather than this stalemate or this gridlock of, I think you have bad intent in this area. If we can find why is this person doing what they're doing? And, this is true power, being able to see perspectives in this way.
Yeah. When we mentioned before about how it feels like people seem to have to think that, or people think that you have to create a line in the sand and people have to be on 2 sides of an issue. When you refuse to see things in that way, when you come to the table and the other person is trying to draw a line in the sand and you just go, yeah, there's no line, and you just kind of brush that line out. And then they draw a line in the sand again and you go, yeah, there's no need for that. And you just sort of brush that line out. Eventually the person stops drawing a line in the sand. And now they're not thinking in these dualistic terms. Again, that's difficult because we live in a society where everything's a duality. I mean, we don't have just a 2-party system. There's a lot of other presidential candidates that come to the table every year, but you wouldn't know that, right? Because it's always about Republican, Democrat. Always, always, always. That's all the media will pay any attention to. The only time they refer to a 3rd-party system is to say that 3rd parties never win, right? Like that's the only time they'll even acknowledge that there are 3rd parties.
Well, there's Ralph Nader again,
right?
Doing his thing.
Yeah, and that's not true. There have been 3rd-party presidents, like candidates that became presidents in the past. It's been a long time, and it certainly was before the media got a hold of this, this duality system. But we live in a world that encourages us to think in dualities, right? Mm-hmm. And in opposition. And if you just don't, right, you just refuse to see things in those terms, and you just come and person draws a line in the sand, you just brush that line out, and you do that over and over and over again. Eventually the person stops drawing the line in the sand. Eventually you're no longer seeing things in terms of sides. I think the last thing I want to mention about generosity of spirit when it comes to psychological or mimetic positions that you take, I think one of the most powerful lessons it teaches us is that we could be wrong. Mm-hmm. Like when you're being generous of spirits in this way, you can't just show somebody all the ways in which they're wrong, right? Like you stop doing that. You step back a little bit, you hold some space for their position, and it means you can't just show all the ways in which you disagree. So because you're not jumping or reacting by showing all the ways in which you disagree, you can actually hold space for your position as well. And you can ask yourself, well, is my position possibly not the right position, right? Because I'm not just in autoresponder mode. I'm not just, thoughtlessly jumping into the fray and going, these are all the reasons why your position is clearly wrong. And I think one of the things that comes out of that is we start to see a difference between our preferences and things that we truly believe are wrong.
Yeah.
A lot of times we have doubled down on our preferences so much, the things that make us feel good or feel bad. And because they're just our preferences, but we've been doubling down on them for so long, we start to think that our preferences are morality.
So we get our preferences mixed up with our core values.
Yeah, exactly. We start to think that stuff that we like and dislike are now ethical considerations as opposed to just personal preferences. So when we don't jump into the fray through an autoresponder that says, no, you are not representing my preferences, you can step back and go, maybe they're just preferences. Maybe they have nothing to do with ethics or morality or right and wrong. Maybe they're just how I choose to see things or how I prefer to see things. And so having generosity of spirit with others is one of the best ways, or generosity of spirit in this way, psychological, mimetic, etc., is one of the best ways to really reevaluate your position and be willing to get some real world feedback. Because I've seen so many times people jump into, an argument and start just tearing down the other person's position. And then when they have to start representing their take on it, right, they create this arbitrary line in the sand and they say how wrong you are. And now they start representing their position. And I'm like, you do realize that your position is nutter butter, right? Like, you do realize that to everybody else, your position looks absolutely crazy. But you can't see that because you're so intent on showing the other person how wrong they are. Mm-hmm. So you also come to, you remove that line in the sand, just kind of brush that out. And now suddenly you're more open to compromise, and you're more open to seeing how your position might not be a true reflection of reality, right? Like, these are just preferences, and to insist that the reality works this way might be a little crazy. So these are preferences. You'll live your life this way, and you can be generous and magnanimous with your compromises and going, yeah, but I don't think you have to live this way.
Yeah. So 2 resources I'll just mention again. Go listen to the Systems Thinking podcast. I think that would help in this thought, because every action somebody takes, every position someone has, is the emergent of a bunch of other stuff happening behind the scenes up to that point in their life. It's not just like they woke up that day, got in a car, decided to cut you off on the freeway. Like they were in the freeway and they have their single perspective and they cut you off because it made sense for them to cut you off for some reason for them. And you can see that that's an emergent of a bunch of other factors, maybe how they were trained how to drive. I'm using a real basic example on the freeway because for some reason the freeways drive me crazy. Like, why do you make these decisions, people? But I do the same thing. Like, I make decisions that probably make no sense to other people because they don't know where I'm at inside my car. I'm looking forward. And this is a great example of how this can play out in a very mundane way in life. So go listen to that podcast. I think it would really help to understand that things are not really so cause and effect based. They're more emergence of a bunch of things happening, an entire system running that's bringing that one action or that one thought or that one process to the forefront. Just like with the Duck Dynasty guy, right? If you look at his history, his past, everything that brought him to the point of him saying that soundbite that everybody jumped on, and I'm not excusing what he said. I'm not saying that I agree with what he said. I'm just saying generosity of spirit will look at the person's emergent and then look at the system behind that and understand, I see how they could get to that point because of all these factors playing in. So I think that would be a really powerful resource for you to listen to. And then another resource is our podcast on the Graves model. Because I think a lot of this dichotomous thinking, this A versus B, this you're on one side or the other, I believe it's part of our development as humans. I think there's a time period we all go through when we have this, it's a very clear my truth versus your truth framework. And as we grow and mature and as we continue to work on ourselves, we're going to evolve past that. And many people already have past a lot of this dichotomous thinking into more of inclusive thinking. Instead of the this or that, it's this and that. It's more and thinking rather than or thinking. And I think that and thinking is very powerful because you're adding in the mix. It's more systemic in nature, and you're getting more of a rounded perspective. So I think those 2 resources could be really helpful on this topic specifically. But we want to also hear from you. What do you think about generosity of spirit? What do you think about this idea? What are your thoughts, your insights, your questions about seeing things from someone else's perspective, being generous with them in how you see them showing up to the table? You can find us at facebook.com/personalityhacker, twitter.com/personalityhack, or our website, personalityhacker.com. We've got a lot of articles, resources, and more podcasts there as well. So Anything else you want to say about generosity of spirit before we sign off? Or did I just kind of close it out?
No, that was a beautiful little bow on top of the package. No, I mean, if I have more to say on it, it'll have to be in a future podcast because I can't think of it now.
Fantastic. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This has been the Personality Hacker Podcast. Come on over to our website, make yourself known, introduce yourself on the Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll talk to you in the next episode.